Okay, this is Mike Benoit doing some more tyranny busting. Busting the tyranny upon the mind of man. Now, I'm a self-styled libertarian and one who declares that anarchists are not libertarians. And also, of course, these people that call for all this government regulations, they too are not libertarians. Those who call for this much government are certainly not libertarians. Those who call for this much would be libertarians. Those who call for this much are not libertarians because, in essence, what they're saying is people cannot form a government because they disagree with that idea. A government to protect their rights, etc., that would be just small. And so instead of voting for this, libertarians by default are accepting this tyranny. And so let's not call those libertarians. This here is a critique on the Sam Seder versus Anthony Furey, and he calls it a libertarian debate. And as we get into it, you'll find out why it's not a libertarian debate. And I'll hopefully make that clear to you. Checking the little things here right now, see about our speaker volume and get it up, because I don't know how these work sometimes. That's going to be higher, so I think that'll work. And we're going to let it run here a little bit. I'll give you a photo, let you see a look at Sam Seder as well. If
on the phone, it is a pleasure to welcome to the program a nationally syndicated columnist from Canada, Anthony Furey. And Anthony, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Sam. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Anthony, what is your website? I just want to plug that as well.
Yeah, thanks. It's FureyOnPolitics.com. Furey spelled F-U-R-E-Y, and you can tweet at me at Anthony Furey.
Okay, so Anthony Furey, FureyOnPolitics.com. That's with an E in between the R and the Y. So Anthony, you sent a couple of stories that you wanted to touch on, but I imagine they make for a larger point. You cited Halifax considering changing or banning doorknobs on new homes, ostensibly, I guess, to provide more access for handicapped. An animal board, I guess, took some animals away from a woman, and another story about Ontario moving ahead with calorie counts on restaurant menus. What's the what is it that you're trying to? What is the point of highlighting those stories?
Yeah, thanks. These are all stories happening in Canada right now. I think there's some similarities to a couple of them in the United States. You know, at the end of the day, and I want to begin by saying, when I first became politically conscious, Sam, I was a pretty left-leaning guy. I wanted good things for people. You know, you hear about the poverty statistics and many other sort of negative, sad indicators happening in people's lives. You go, that's not good at all. So you become a fan of certain calls for government intervention that you hear about. But then I started to realize, well, some people's idea of good things is going to differ a little bit from my idea of good things. And then I realized, well, hang on a second. Sometimes if these people get into power, I mean, they're going to use their power to enforce good things upon me, upon others, even if we don't really agree on what's good about those things. And then I realized, gee, you know, I don't think my conception of liberty is not that the majority or a certain person gets the power and then enforces good things upon people. My conception of government is that you want to maximize liberties. And when I look at these three stories, Sam, these are...
I'll interject a little bit here. The Anthony Furey will actually contradict his own viewpoint there, and I agree with that. He's talking a libertarian line, but later on he'll contradict himself and agree with government interventions, but like to a smaller degree.
These are examples of people's pliability for big government gone totally off the rails. A hyper-regulation of our lives that is even turning previous left-wing people centrist. I say the biggest thing that moves people towards the liberty movement is being screwed over by big government in a way they never thought imaginable, and that turns them on a dime sometimes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, I agree with you. I don't, you know, for instance, I have a problem with certain with wars and with a lot of government policies. I don't know if I have a problem with these specifically. I haven't looked into them, but I will stipulate that maybe you know, maybe they're not good policies. But why? But what is the alternative? Well, let's just start with something that you said. What does that mean? Maximize liberty. What do you define as liberty?
Well, generally I define it as society in which you're not regulating much because you believe more in the ability of both voluntary association and for people to work it out by themselves. Generally, the things that we want to criminalize or make illegal are things that violate people's liberty, violate people's consent. But I think more and more now we're drifting towards wanting to legislate optimal living, optimal standards of care. So one of the stories I pointed out is that Humane Societies for Animals in Canada have delegated policing authority, even though they don't have the same oversight as police. And I'm very wary of, you know, policing. I'm wary of some war conflicts, as you mentioned you are. But at the end of the day, these organizations are able to essentially enforce optimal standards of care on pet owners. People are being charged, low-income people who don't pay for dental care themselves in Canada, are being charged for not treating their dogs for gingivitis. I mean, it's absolute madness.
Okay, all right. Well, I mean, look, I will stipulate, without even knowing the details of it, I mean, if it helps the context of our argument, I will stipulate that there are bad laws, there are bad regulations. But the real question is, I mean, I think everyone is aware of that. But the point is that when you say something like we want less government, I mean, do you really, what does that mean? You're saying that in the context of a vacuum. Let me use an example from the United States, for instance.
Sure.
The Obama administration has proposed putting ratings on colleges and universities in this country based on an equation that would basically measure how much money you put in and how much money you get out. Now, I happen to think this is and ostensibly, I guess it's so that you know, it will crack down on some not very reputable for-profit institutions.
Sounds like a terrible idea.
But I think it's a terrible idea.
Yeah, I don't know why Sam's going to tell us why he thinks it's a terrible idea. But, you know, first off, he asked the question, what do you consider, what was the question, what do you consider a lot less government? What do you consider, I don't know, was it, let's see, let's go back, let's find exactly how that question went, and then answer that directly.
Towards wanting to legislate optimal living, optimal standards of care. So one of the stories I pointed out is that Humane Societies for Animals in Canada have delegated policing authority, even though they don't have the same oversight as police. And I'm very wary of, you know, policing. I'm wary of some war conflicts, as you mentioned you are. But at the end of the day, these organizations are able to essentially enforce optimal standards of care on pet owners. People are being charged, low-income people who don't pay for dental care themselves in Canada, are being charged for not treating their dogs for gingivitis. I mean, it's absolute madness.
Okay, all right. Well, I mean, look, I will stipulate, without even knowing the details of it, I mean, if it helps the context of our argument, I will stipulate that there are bad laws, there are bad regulations. But the real question is, I mean, I think everyone is aware of that. But the point is that when you say something like we want less government, I mean, do you really, I mean, what does that mean?
Well, I'll tell Sam Seder what less government means. Sam Seder, we had a federal government that's sucking $4 trillion out of the economy, and about 80% of that is unconstitutional spending. That'd be all your socialism, and that would be, well, yeah, put it down to your socialistic redistribution and your idiotic programs such as paying farmers not to grow food, etc. Yeah, you want less government, and then when you got 50 titles to the United States codes and hundreds of thousands of pages of regulations and whatnot. You got a federal government sticking its nose into the domestic affairs of the state ad nauseum, telling us, what size light bulbs that we can have and size of the toilets and et cetera, et cetera. These controllers are going to micromanage everything. They're sucking away 50% of the production of the average American. So what does a lot less government mean? Well, it means the constitutional limited government from the federal end, and then we can talk about the states later, but which would be about a reduction of about 80%. And all of these mandated programs from your Affordable Care Act. See, they get away with calling things the Patriot Act, Affordable Care Act. It's a Affordable Tyranny Act, or it's a Awful Tyranny Act, or whatever. But a tyranny upon the mind of man. And these are things of force, and that Comrade Sam and his followers believe that it's okay to impose on us. But the cost of all of these things, and every mandate that comes along in regards to the federal government mandating from A to Z, that's a heck of a lot less government, Sam.
You're saying that in the context of a vacuum. Let me use an example from the United States, for instance.
Sure.
The Obama administration has proposed putting ratings on colleges and universities in this country.
I think several, that provide ratings on various high schools, universities, colleges.
No, I agree with all that.
So done. But I think people are increasingly amenable to the idea that, well, why isn't the government doing this?
Well, no, wait a second. That's not what I'm talking about. Again, it's not a question of specific policies, because I certainly disagree with specific policies the government follows.
No, but I'm saying that the way the philosophy is going now.
What is your perspective on funding and making low-cost education available for people? Is that problematic as well, or is that one that you do like?
Well, I think it's definitely something that the government didn't do at a certain time period, when whatever jurisdiction we're talking about in Canada.
Well, in the United States,
public education.
The United States, for instance, 30 years ago in this country, you could, in fact, get a virtually free, high-quality higher education, but because of cutbacks, we don't have that.
Where do you start with that? How many years ago did you say? 30, 40 years ago, you could get a good quality education in this country. But because of cutbacks, you don't have that anymore. Oh, my God. I mean, this is just unbelievable. Now, and you say good quality education, it's like, what are you comparing it to? But nevertheless, or nonetheless, he's attributing to not enough money going into the educational system, and the astronomical amount of money that's going into it now, and the products that are coming out of it, unbelievable. What Sam Seder doesn't seem to understand is that whenever you put a third party in between consumer and producer, then you're altering the dynamics in such a way that the producer does not have to satisfy the consumer, and the consumer does not have to worry about costs. And so you just destroy that natural occurring pressure to give a great product at a low price. And that's what this socialism brings you.
Anymore. So the historical analogy, that part of it breaks down. So let's just address it on its merits. Do you think this is a good idea? If not, why?
Well, if we're talking about colleges and universities, I think the more government has been involved in funding them and regulating and providing for them, and in Canada, universities are very government funded, I think it's very much a bad thing for a number of reasons. Government is notoriously slow to respond to the realities of the situation in the economy, the free market demands, so they keep funneling money towards careers and professions that don't provide a bang for your buck. So it's half funded by the taxpayer, and it's half funded by these poor kids who leave school with on average $30,000 of debt, and our schools are way cheaper here than yours, so I know your debt levels are way higher. Folks get out there, they can't buy a house.
Well, but my point is if it's a free school, they're not going to leave with debt.
Yeah, so go. Well, there are free schools right now, Sam. But
You know, these socialists, free schools. They steal that money off the back of someone else. That's the labor off the back of somebody else, and give it to another person, and say it's a free school. And again, what does that drive up the cost through the socialist paradigm system of the state owning everything? And this is just a progression step of this socialism. This free. I want it for free. This idea that having education for free is the same idea as that. There's let's say there's three people on the street. And there's a rich guy, medium guy, and a poor guy. And the poor guy and the medium guy get together and say, poor guy needs help, so we're going to go over and take the rich guy's stuff and give it to the poor guy. And but if the rich guy can turn around and find a way to maybe through the products he sells get that money back from the poor guy and the medium guy, they end up paying for it. But the cost of the product goes way up through the ceiling when you got a third party involved, and that's what this third party, this redistributor of labor and wealth, is going to take their cut besides, and not care what the product's like, but just care about the ability to have the facade. And here's your free education. Free education. I want something for free. You're through the Constitution, you're entitled to have your free the rights that you were born with. Your inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness through all lawfully acquired property. But that's not to provide those things for you. There's no freedom to provide those and to plunder other people. You're stealing from other people to make that happen. And you're talking about how wonderful it is because it's free.
People actually, there's anarchist universities that you can go to in the park. Andrew Carnegie started the library system because he wanted free education for regular folks in America. I'm completely in support of all of that stuff. The challenge with the whole government system is we're going to say it's free, but of course the bureaucracy is going to grow, the regulatory regime is going to grow, and it'll never end up being completely free because you're going to have to continually backfunnel all this growth that we have because there's no owner looking after a government education system.
Anthony, in this country, now I understand you're from Canada, you don't know the history of this country, and I don't know the history of Canadian higher education, but I am telling you, I have reams of data which show that states are cutting back on their funding of these state university programs. They are not getting the money from the federal government to make up the difference. There was at this time in this country a very good system of state universities that were at virtually no cost, very low cost. So the issue of debt was not an issue. That's why we have such explosive debt in this country for student loans that we've never had in the past. So,
you know what? If you followed what he just said, tell me. But what he just said is that, in some means that we used to have low cost and education then we got all the student debt now, and why would you have this now? And the funding has gone down, but that's the way it works with socialism. See, you have to start rationing, and when it goes with socialism, the cost of things become quite dear because are scarce, and then they become scarce. They're more expensive, and then when you have a situation where you get to just pour on the spigot to make money available, then and people can get low interest rate and free money and a hope of a great job, they're going to pay it later with their great job, but then the quality of education does suffer between when there isn't a consumer directly buying from the producer. But whatever he said, who knows?
So is it a good or bad idea, according to you, to address this? I mean, you say they're slow, so they're not providing money into the universities that are going to provide a good return on investment, and so it's creating debt. But I'm talking about universities that do not add debt, significant debt, to their graduates. So So is that a good idea?
I'm telling you that already exists. I'm telling you there are so many ways you can go out and educate yourself in society without having this government regime and bureaucracy in the way. I mean, the challenge right now.
How would one do that in the United States?
If we make any bachelor's degree completely free right now, and we have this problem in Canada, people are indulging in degrees that really are completely.
Okay, now they're going to go on for a while, and then go on for a while as like this monopoly of the school system that is existing, and Sam Seder is going to get into this. He's going to talk about, you know, that to get these higher paid jobs, you got to get this education, you got to get this paper stamped, you know. I got a BA and a MA and a PhD and da-da-da-da. And that, and the discussion will wrap around how, you know, insurance companies used to hire people to say to be insurance agents and whatnot, and not even have college degrees. And so there's a lot of folks out there, they want people for positions to have these college degrees, and because that's the mindset. You say, oh, look, you know, yeah, he's got a college degree. Oh, great, college degree. Rah, 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 rah. He's smart. He's going to be the best performer here. Whereby, you know, let's just say somebody went out and learned on his own to speak 10 languages. And through the modern technology, you can do that. Well, there's no paper there saying, hey, look, you know, this guy is like super genius, 10 companies, 10 languages, and no, that he doesn't have that college degree, so we better not hire him. And so that there's this huge, expensive, bloated system that's breaking the back of everybody, not everybody, but quite a bit of folks that are involved in the student loans and everything else. And the degree of education is going way down. Along with that, and what Sam Seder's position is, you know, we got to have more of that kind of education. And it's got to be free. Someone else is going to pay for it. This is not so. So I may skip ahead here a little bit and see if he covers a different topic.
People and prolonging their adolescence. The education system and the idea that you need 19 degrees and 7 internships before you can go out and hit the workforce is essentially denying. I'm not suggesting that this is criminal or wrong. I'm suggesting that the way this narrative is being sold is completely wrong, and it's harming us right now. It's harming human liberty. It's harming human freedom. You don't think it's bizarre that we're facing staggering debt amounts, that we're hyper-regulated as a system?
Opt for smaller payments if you take retirement at 62. It also
provides going up by a couple of years too soon.
Right. It provides for orphans. It provides for disability. And if there's more money being taken in than is being paid out, it goes into essentially a small investment fund,
sure, which
buys U.S. Treasuries. Now, this was.
So now old Sam Seder is extolling the virtues of Social Security here, and got no problem with the age going from 65 to 67. And he's got no problem with this forced system that people are forced into. That and talking about how wonderful it is because it's money for orphans and et cetera, et cetera. And the system was initially voluntary, 100% voluntary, except for the companies that had 8 or more employees, and they were forced into paying into this no matter what. So people opted in for this thing. And then he talks about, well, if it collects more in, then it's invested in treasury bills. And that's like a really, really farcical joke, because it's like it takes more in for the Social Security payments than what it's bringing in. Well, the payments going out are less than the payments coming in from the workers. So we'll take the difference and we'll buy treasury bills, and we got these treasury bills, and so that's an asset. And what's treasury bills but a debt instrument? It's like saying, so that when if the Social Security Administration or somewhere they call it a lockbox, they got this treasury bills, IOU, Social Security, the United States government owes the United States government money, this much money, $500 billion. Where does that have to come from to pay that? Oh, of course, taxes. So, and it's money that's spent. So it's just smoke and mirrors game there. But the whole idea, and then he's talking about, you know, how wonderful this is, and then he gets into referencing, and I don't know if we'll actually play the part where he's referencing, but he'll reference how so many seniors were so poor before he started this system. And what did you have when they were so poor? Well, you have the Depression, where people were wiped out, and they were wiped out by government policies, but that's another story for another day. So the government and the banking institution wipes these people out, and so they're indigent and they're poor. So we come around the corner and say, hey, look, this is for the future. This won't happen to you in your future. You get into the Social Security program, and we'll mandate you make payments into this. This will be your retirement nest egg. And then the dependency of people, and then he actually talks about how many people are, you know, dependent on this like it's a great system, and that they're going to get this. And then, you know, it will be wonderful to Sam Seder until it comes to the point where people go, you know, this Social Security check I'm getting, it doesn't buy much. And of course, Sam Seder will blame it on something other than the actual cause. And the actual cause is the destruction of the value of the currency, along with the destruction of the incentive to produce product because it's being confiscated by socialism. Let's Sam go for a bit.
Imposed on the United States, or you could look at it that way, or you could say the people demanded it. And so do you think that this is problematic?
And it's interesting you say the people demanded it. Do you think that when there's an election and you've got Mitt Romney saying one thing and Barack Obama saying the other thing, you know, do you think that there's third or fourth or fifth or sixth options out there, but people aren't being given a referendum on those options? So right
well,
now,
I can tell you what the polling says, and I can tell you that
the polling on those two issues. You know, we present only a certain number of issues, and
well, I'm just trying to have a conversation with you about.
I know, and I'm explaining to you my answer because the political class has a particular stake in broadening its role in our lives. Of course, they are only going to present options that are in the polls and that are on the ballot box, which serve their interests. Very few people run in office saying, sending us down the path to Greece. I just want to save in time.
That doesn't redistribute.
Hopefully, most taxation systems will not be actually about redistributing from one person given to
they
another,
all
but
are.
to create some sort. No, taxation programs that create core fundamentals, and government used to do primary things, like it created the roads, it created infrastructure. I think it should be.
Okay, they're talking, and then the disagreement is that Sam Seder says that all taxes are redistributive, and of course the anarchists would agree with him on that, and Anthony Furey is saying no, and that's correct. You know, if you had a taxation system that just was for the purpose of, let's say, the judicial system to prosecute real criminals and incarcerate real criminals, and you had taxes for that. That's not redistributive. That's for everybody. That's it clears up the soup so that the bad guys aren't running around out there to do you harm. So those aren't redistributive. And or if you're paying gasoline tax for the roads, and they're not redistributive. When someone buys a loaf of bread, even if they're shut in, there's a cost involved for the roads, and the benefit that they received is built in that loaf of bread. So Sam Seder, not all taxes are redistributive, but the anarchists would agree with you.
Creating more public transit, we sort of have a problem there. Now it's gone to creating more tertiary things. We've gone.
This guy talks about creating more public transit, and that's just that's off a libertarian bent there. That's a governmental program where people, if they own their own means of transportation and they pay for their own means of transportation, then that fits. But then what Anthony just went off his own principle that against redistributive taxes, because these public transportations are not paid by the people that are using them. They're paid by people that are using them, but also a bunch of people who aren't using them.
From shared things to public good and common good items that taxation paid for, to now going off to spend to other people's niche interests, whether it's the crazy earmark system that you have in U.S. Congress, thankfully, our good things? Who gets to decide them? That's why we should have as few decisions of these as possible, Sam, so that, you know, if you get into
Who gets
office,
to decide which
you're not making
decisions are made?
decisions I disagree with, so that I get into office, I don't get to violate Sam Seder's morals and political philosophy by getting into office. If you leave it all up to us to do on our own as much as possible, and if you approach it from that philosophy, and they go back to the whole reason I'm here and that I'm starting with, if we further the philosophy that human beings can do it on their own, that we're industrious, brilliant folk who, working together in communities and voluntary associations, can solve so many problems out there. We don't need this massive, slow-hurdling regulatory regime for corruption
you keep
that
saying
nobody understands.
All right, so yeah, well, elections sort of decide those things, no?
Well, yes and no. You really think, you know, Barack Obama, so I had no idea what was going on at the IRS, so clearly we didn't revamp all of government just by bringing people. You're taking money from them to pay for these people to decide whether or not
so
someone gets
is your argument that we
Why
shouldn't
don't
have tax-free status for, let's say...
just lower the general income tax rates and get rid of all tax-free status.
Tax-free...
Okay, so obviously Anthony Furey is in favor of the income tax, but he's got a better system, and he wants to get rid of these tax-free status things. And who knows what Sam's ultimate position on tax-free status type things, but he seemed to be taken aback when, say, a charitable organization would lose its tax-free status. This permission from government to get opted out of the tax slavery institution and the income tax is about redistribution. It's Karl Marx's one of the planks in the Communist Manifesto. And so your income tax, or so-called income tax, is the government saying how much of your labor you can keep. Now, of course, the original incarnation of that was taking some of the corporation profits, and then as time went on, labeling what everybody got as income, and so income somehow is gain. So to dumb down and put a tyranny upon the mind of people, the mind of man, is to tell them that their money from wages is income and it's gain, and that they have to pay a tax on that gain, as if they didn't expend anything for that remuneration, that there wasn't a like value expended for that compensation, that somebody wants to label as income and say it's gain to the recipient and let's tax it. This socialist agenda that Furey inadvertently is supporting here, along with Sam Seder.
For groups that are doing like feeding the poor.
Yes. One, the public would be able to decide for themselves, but most of us don't carry mercury detectors in our pocket.
That's right.
So I'm really not concerned about that fact. No.
So
we probably,
you're really just upset about those three stories you sent me, is what it sounds like.
I'm really just
So old Sam Seder and Anthony Furey here are discussing, and I guess they're extolling the virtues of the FDA, Food and Drug Administration, and what's the other one? Bureau of Alcohol and Tobacco and Firearms, or some of these other ones. And they think that, boy, we wouldn't be safe if it wasn't without them, or our health department, or any of this. We had to have these people go around inspecting, and that we would not set high standards ourselves. We can't exist without these folks.
But those do upset me quite a lot, Sam. You are right about that. But no, I'm pretty much upset about,
Give me something concrete, like a big policy. Yes, in Halifax. I don't know.
You want me to go, but then you say, where do you want to go? And I go where I want to go. And you say, well, no. Their little niche tax credit, or because you've taken away their pork barrel funding, which is what...
Or under the auspices of the Community Reinvestment Act, we know that it was deregulation in the financial markets that severed the ties between these loans that were being made.
Oh man, this deregulation in the financial market that severed the ties, blah, blah, blah. Nothing about Congress mandating that these loans be made. Nothing about, the HUD, Housing Urban Development Governmental Program. Never mind that the government of the United States owns half of these loans. Never mind that the Federal Reserve Bank is a gigantic fraud anyways, and we're living with fiat currency instead of fiduciary currency or actual currency or money, gold and silver. And there's a fraudulent banking system with fractional reserve banking where they can multiply the money supply 8 times by the magic of fractional reserve banking and the manipulation of the market rate interest and whatnot, and the taxation of people. And they talk about the income tax manipulation. If you're buying a house, the payments, which are mostly interest, they'll allow you to deduct that off your taxes. But if you're renting and maybe the guy that gets to deduct the interest payments on the mortgage is the landlord who receives your rent, not you. And the insanity of all this micromanagement, this tyranny upon the mind of man, anti-liberty. Sam Seder is going to Sam Seder is going to go into this rah, how it was the deregulation of the banking system, and we need more regulations. And there's deregulation, the deregulation of fraud in the first place, granted by Congress to the Federal Reserve Bank. Another video, another time.
And the securitization of these loans.
Did you call for an end to the bailouts? Honest question, I just don't know.
For the banks?
Yeah.
Did I call for an end to the bailouts? I called
Did you oppose them
for.
when they were happening?
Because
the case is, what is the deregulation that did it? Let them deal with it. Let them die. I don't care.
No, I wanted actually
the banks
relief to go directly to the homeowners. I mean, I think initially those bailouts for the banks, I think there's an argument as to whether they were necessary, and we saw the implications of what happened in the financial markets in terms of jobs, but ultimately I would have liked to seen a lot more of that money reoriented directly to the homeowners to do a cram down on their principal. So, I mean...
Oh, that's okay, yeah. Let's take the money from the renters. Let's take the money from the other producers that don't have homes, that got above and beyond. And Sam wants to give the money that they're taking from these people that can't even afford a home to the homeowners that got way out of whack and couldn't keep up with the payments, whether it's their fault or not, because that's better than giving it to the criminal banking institution. And this is all part and parcel of the same thing. Part and parcel of the idea of plundering from one citizen to give to another, but only Sam's method in his brain is better than the others.
In some sense, yes, I guess I called for an end to the bailouts, but I called them to be redirected. What is the free market solution to that?
I agree with what you. The free market solution to a food shortage program is to create...
Not shortage. There's plenty of food. It's some people can't afford food. So what is the free market solution there?
Well, it's funny that you talk about the food regulation, and you say to me, am I happy with the idea that you can't say there's not rat poison in it when there is. You also get to other systems where there's so many other processes where there's such a great amount of regulation on the food supply chain, whether it's through the transportation system or through the different rules or the different corporate tax rates in different jurisdictions, and then they're jumping from one state to the other, or they're going down to Mexico to process their food. You get to a point where you're disincentivizing these people from creating food services out there that would be at a better cost for people. I mean, we have, right now there is food available in America and Canada very cheaply from places like Walmart and so forth, that people say, I'm not sure if I really like the quality of that food there, but that's the only
people
stuff
can't
that they're
afford
able to
the
get
food
right
even at Walmart. That's why if they could, they would not be eligible.
People can't afford the food, so this is Sam's clarion call to steal money from people who can barely feed their family, because he thinks there's people that can't afford the food even at Walmart. And this other guy is trying to mention some of the things that keeps the food cost up. The people that want to grow food in their backyard, they can't go out and sell the food on the street. That they don't have permit. They're not permitted by law to do that. There's prohibitions on that. And what else? There's grocery stores that have to throw food away because it might be close to an expiration date, and rules and regulations cause them to have to throw this food away. They can't put it out there and maybe give it to the hungry. But government making people starve, causing people to starve, and guys like Sam Seder will say, "Oh, we need more government so people aren't starving."
For food stamps.
Sam, how is this possible? And and I'm glad you bring this up. How is it possible that your government is spending $250 billion a year on interest charges on the debt, and there are people who can't afford basic food, and yet there are thousands of programs at the local, state, and federal level to end poverty, and yet people are hungry right now? How is that possible? I think that the government programs are the one that's failing. If you're wasting hundreds of billions of dollars.
Well, now explain to me. Wait a second. I'll address what you just said, but I want to hear what the free market solution to getting those people food is. You're basically saying strip away the regulation in the shipping, strip away the regulation in the food safety, and the food will be cheap enough for them to eat it. Is that what you're saying?
The free market solution is a slow. You can't. If you want me to say abolish the program, the problem is we have a.
I don't want you to say anything except for answer the question. You said free market.
I am answering.
Yeah, and Sam Seder, you want me to explain to you why it is that all the food production and consumption of this country goes on kind of like without a lot of centralized control on it. There's centralized control that are causing some of the problems that you're talking about, but the overall, these people out here produce enough food, the right amount of food to get out to all of these different locations, and it's done without any of all this micromanaging and control, that the restaurants know how much food to order each day, and that they have their suppliers know how much food to order, and that this stuff is just working. And you want me to explain to you why it just works? It's a supply and demand curve, and that the restaurants and the grocery stores and whatnot will pretty well order pretty close to what they need, and yet maybe they would have a 5% sometimes abundance, but they're required to throw that away according to Sam Seder's government regulations.
The question right now, and I'm explaining to you, sure, if we just suddenly abolish the program, the problem is we have a huge vacuum there because people have been used to having the program, and we've created a society that works around that program existing. But these programs are really not doing much to
people who can't afford to eat, and those people will have the money to eat. Is that what you're suggesting?
That could be one thing that could happen. What also could happen is that these folks who have more of the money would have more money to go out there and buy this.
Okay, we're going to pretty well end it on that. No, Sam Seder, those people would all go hungry and starve to death if it wasn't for government. We would not have jobs if it wasn't for government. We would not have food if it wasn't for government. We need government to make us, our inalienable right to be fed, Sam Seder, our inalienable right to live off the expense of somebody else, and all those poor people would be starving to death. Well, if everybody's like Sam Seder was just sitting back waiting for the government to do it, they might. But not everybody's like you. Lots of folks would say, hey, nobody goes hungry. You come here, you want to do a little bit of work. I don't have much money or food, but I'll share what I got. That's what people do, Sam Seder, until governments confiscate too much and leave us all sitting on the corner in bread lines, soup lines, looking for something to eat. So that's all for now. This has been a Mike Benoit Tyranny Busters presentation. Lift the tyranny upon your mind. Centralized control by government is a Soviet Union-style system that doesn't work. Even the communist Red Chinese are allowing a free market to go to work solving problems. Sam Seder, see if your Soviet Union is existing somewhere where you can go play the game you want to play, but it isn't freedom, it's tyranny.